r/AskReddit. What sounds like fiction but is actually a real historical event. The Emu War. When Australia went to war with emus. Not only that, but they lost to birds. The Persian leader Cambyses II used cats to defeat an Egyptian army. He had his soldiers paint cats on their shields and brought hundreds of cats and other animals that the Egyptians held sacred to the front lines. The Egyptians refused to fight the cat army and were easily defeated because of it. In 2007, a paraglider got trapped in the updraft of two joining thunderstorms and lifted to an altitude of 10 kilometers. She landed 3.5 hours later about 60 kilometers north of her starting position, having survived extreme cold, lightning, and lack of oxygen. Imagine how fucking scary that would be. She doesn't remember much of it since she became unconscious quite quickly. If I recall correctly, she regained consciousness when she was back down at 3,500 m. Imagine how fucking scary that would be. For real, imagine waking up 2 miles up in the air. A Chinese emperor once ran in circles around a pillar to escape an assassin. He survived. I've used similar tactics with my father. 10 out of 10 would run around in circles again. Edit. No, he didn't have jumper cables. Sorry to hear that your dad tried to assassinate you. That wasn't just a Chinese emperor. That was Qin Shi Huang, before he united China and became the first emperor in all its history. Searched him up, and his third assassination attempt was fascinating to me. A man swore vengeance against him, and hired a strongman assassin. He equipped this strongman with a heavy metal cone that weighed 160 pounds. The strongman, along with another, waited on a mountain top by a route they knew Qin Shi Huang would take. They saw the carriage, and the strongman hurled the cone and shattered the carriage completely. The thing is, Qin Shi Huang traveled with 2 identical carriages for this purpose. The assassin destroyed the first, but Qin was in the second. The assassin and his accomplice escaped in spite of a manhunt searching for them. Was an interesting read. Some guy in Australia decided he wanted to hunt rabbits, but rabbits don't live in Australia, so then he released like 12 in his backyard and now there's a ton of rabbits in Australia. During World War I, Christmas 1914, the British and German forces on the Western Front unofficially made a ceasefire without the authorization of their superiors in order to celebrate, trade goods, and play football. Also during World War I, the Russian and German armies in Poland stopped fighting each other in order to fight off an enormous pack of wolves that had been attacking both armies. In 1504, a German imperial knight lost his hand to a cannon shot which forced his sword against him. He lived pretty amazing for that time, and instead of, stopping with fighting and living the rest of his life in peace, he had an iron hand forged. Some Jamie Lannister crap. Let me repeat that. This mother clucker had an iron hand prosthetic over 500 years ago. He continued fighting for 40 years, after which he chilled in the castle of Hornburg for his final years. His name was Gods of the Iron Hand, and the hand itself is still at display. The longest piano piece of any kind is Vexations by Erik Satie. It consists of a 180-note composition which, on the composer's orders, must be repeated 840 times so that the whole performance is 18 hours 40 minutes. Its first reported public performance in September 1963, in the Pocket Theater, New York City, required a relay team of 10 pianists. The New York Times critic fell asleep at 4 a.m. and the audience dwindled to 6 masochists. At the conclusion, one sadomasochist shouted, "Encore!" Jack, a baboon who was employed to change rail signals. After initial skepticism, the railway decided to officially employ Jack once his job competency was verified. The baboon was paid 20 cents a day, and a half bottle of beer each week. It is widely reported that in his 9 years of employment with the railroad, Jack never made a mistake. The Japanese kamikaze, Divine Wind, that saved the country from an amphibious invasion by the Mongolian hordes. The Mongols captured a foothold on some outlying Japanese islands, and started to attack the mainland. The Japanese army pushed them back, and they had to retreat to China. When they did, a typhoon ravaged their navy and sank their ships. The Mongolians, probably reasonably, seeing this as a fluke, decided to rebuild and attack again. 7 years later. Unfortunately, for them, the Japanese fortified their coastline. After basically months of sailing around seeking a place to land, another typhoon struck their fleet and destroyed them. There would be no third invasion. The marathon at the 1904 Olympics in St. Louis. The first place finisher did most of the race in a car. He had intended to drop out, and got a cart back to the stadium to get his change of clothes, and just kind of started jogging when he heard the fanfare. The second place finisher was carried across the finish line, legs technically twitching, by his trainers. They had been refusing him water, and giving him a mixture of brandy and rat poison for the entire race. Doping wasn't illegal yet, and this was a terrible attempt at it, so he got the gold when the first guy was revealed. Third finisher was unremarkable, somehow. Fourth finisher was a Cuban mailman, who had raised the funds to attend the Olympics by running non-stop around his entire country. He landed in New Orleans, and promptly lost all of the traveling money on a riverboat casino. He ran the race in dress shoes and long trousers, cut off at the knee by a fellow competitor with a knife. He probably would have come in first, well, second, behind the car, had it not been for the hour nap he took on the side of the track after eating rotten apples he found on the side of the race. 9th and 12th finishers were from South Africa, and ran barefoot. South Africa didn't actually send a delegation, these were students who just happened to be in town and thought it sounded fun. 9th was chased a mile off course by angry dogs. Note, these are the first Africans to compete in any modern Olympic event. Half the participants had never raced competitively before. Some died. St. Louis only had one water stop on the entire run. This, coupled with the dusty road, and exacerbated by the cars kicking up dust, lead to the above fatalities. And yet, somehow, rat poison guy survived to get the gold. The Russian delegation arrived a week late, because they were still using the Julian calendar. In 1904. Seriously. This needs to be a movie. This sounds like some Monty Python crap. The rise and fall of Alexander the Great. Never lost a battle in his life, conquered the whole known world, and only stopped because his soldiers were tired. And then died of the flu when he was like 32. The Glasgow Ice Cream Wars. 6 people died in a turf war over ice cream van routes. They were dealing heroin out of the vans. I love my city so much. As the plane lands in Glasgow, passengers are reminded to set their watches back 25 years. There were a few Japanese soldiers who refused to surrender after World War II and remained on duty in the rainforest for 30 years after the war ended. There was one here in the Philippines. This guy never knew the war had ended decades ago, and stayed in his position like he did during the war. He lived in a jungle forest, away from the then current world. Apparently, they found his captain years and years later, old and retired. His captain asked him to return home, to Japan, cause Japan lost and the war had already ended. He refused to believe that Japan lost the war. Eventually his captain convinced him and he returned back to Japan. In the 1800s, there were street vendors in Egypt who sold ancient Egyptian mummies. Just lined them up on a street corner and sold them like they were umbrellas on a rainy day. English tourists would buy them to display as oddities. Check out the CIA's assassination attempts on Castro. Some highlights include planting a bomb in a large seashell, and then painting it bright colors and placing it on the ocean floor in hopes Castro would see it while swimming and pick it up. Exploding cigars. Poisoned cigars that were supposed to be given to Castro but were instead given to an unknown individual. Spraying Castro's broadcasting station with LSD. Poisoning Castro's shoes so that his beard would fall out. Poisoning a chocolate milkshake. Only the pills froze together in the freezer and shattered before they could be placed in the shake. Contaminating a diving suit with a toxic fungus and giving it to Castro, only for the man set to deliver the suit to decide to give him a higher quality diving suit. A ballpoint pen with a very fine hypodermic needle. Today I learned that the CIA used to be run by Wile E. Coyote. A town in France nearly danced itself to death in 1518 because of a dancing plague.
Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe as well for more Reddit stories like this. Until next time.